I'm Jason Bradford.
I'm Rob Dietz.
And I'm Asher Miller. Welcome to Crazy Town, where only two things could possibly happen. We all die tomorrow, or we move to Mars next Thursday.
Hi, this is producer Melody Allison. Thanks for joining us in Crazy Town, where Jason, Rob, and Asher tackle crazy-making topics like climate change, overshoot, runaway capitalism, and why we're all deluding ourselves. Here's a quick warning. Sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
Now, on to the show.
Okay, hey, Rob and Jason. Nice to see you guys. We're not in the same room together, thank God. But we're here virtually.
I love this technology, actually.
Well, yeah, and it's a good thing that we're on video because I want to do a show and tell today.
Oh,
Are you
good.
guys ready?
Yeah.
All right. Do you guys see this?
Well, it looks
It's
like
a
something
sea
you
urchin.
might...
It's a blue sea urchin.
What do you think it is?
I think it's like one of those like comfort balls or something you squeeze, it's tactile thing to kind of reduce anxiety. Is it for your dog
You're close.
or you?
Okay, what about you roll your back on it to hit pressure points?
You could do all those things, try to do all those things, but it's actually a dryer ball. Have you guys heard of dryer balls before?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. I've known this dryer ball longer than I've known either of you two guys. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. We've had it in our family for a long time. We still use it. We toss it in the dryer when we dry our clothes. And they're supposed to help kind of increase the efficiency of your dryer, require less drying time, therefore less energy to use.
Yeah.
The reason I have this thing, and I've had it for so long, is because my wife, Kirsten, who you both know, and
Wonderful wife.
way back when, still this century, but it was a long time ago. This is, many, many moons ago, back in 2006, we quit our jobs and we started working on climate change. We both saw An Inconvenient Truth. Our son, Avi, who's now off of college, had just been born. We were aware of climate issues, but that film really hit us hard, and we're like, we got to work on this stuff. And I've talked about this before. Maybe I've talked about this on this podcast before, but I often talk about that phase of my work in sustainability as like the phase where I was learning to swim in the shallow end of the pool. Because what Kirsten and I wound up doing, with all the best of intentions, was trying to figure out how to put together basically a package of things that people could buy that would help them kind of green their lifestyle.
Brilliant. Climate consumerism. This is wonderful. That's one of the technologies.
We had these, canvas bags, reusable water bottles, that kind of thing.
There's bamboo stuff, I'm sure, probably in there.
I don't know that we had bamboo, but I look back at it now, and you see I'm blushing.
To dry your bags, like after you hand wash your plastic bags.
I don't think we had that in there. It would have made the box too big.
If you were swimming in the deeper end of the pool, you would have just been telling people to get one bowl, like a good monk. That's your only possession.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
That's right. So you could see I'm blushing because I think back on those days with slight embarrassment. But, look, I was operating with the knowledge I had. I was swept up in the moment of there was like a whole cottage industry that cropped up after that film came out of the 10 things you could do to save the planet or whatever. And, we were well-intentioned, but it was definitely, I would say, the bargaining phase of my journey in grappling with climate and sustainability issues. So I'm just wondering if you guys can relate.
No, you sound like, you're a complete moron, of course. But actually,
thank you.
But actually,
this is your first source of evidence for that.
But actually, I think we've all been there. Is this gonna be one of those sort of like painful kind of reveals?
This is confession time.
Yeah, it's a little therapy session for us here.
I remember I was a postdoc at UC Davis, and I remember riding my bike. It was great, and I had a little trailer, and I would pull my kids around. So I was biking my kids to preschool, and I'm on campus, and for some reason I get in the conversation with this. I think he's an undergrad, and I'm in my early 30s. I know shit now, and we're just like on the bike path. I don't know how we stopped and started talking, and I had probably just read a couple issues of the Sierra Club magazine, and he's asking me, what are we going to do about climate change? How are we going to power, the society and stuff? And I think I went through kind of a litany of like the technologies that would be deployed at scale that would make Karl Pope just,
Giddy.
smile.
He's like,
giddy.
yeah,
Like,
he got it.
He got it.
Yeah.
So I actually remember a few years later looking back on that and go, God, I wish I could meet that kid again and shake him and apologize.
Apologize for giving him hope.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking you were talking about meeting yourself and shaking yourself.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is what you should
Or
have done.
running yourself over with a bike.
Yeah.
That could have been the other thing you did.
Well, okay. If you want to pile on here, kind of a similar time frame as you, Jason. I was coming out of graduate school in environmental science and engineering, and was working for the U.S. Geological Survey and really the Fish and Wildlife Service is who we were working for at the time, and doing all this conservation biology stuff, right? Like trying to figure out what landscapes need to be conserved. And when you start diving into that arena, you realize it's almost all bad news. It can be incredibly sad. You're looking at the sixth mass extinction. You go to one of the conferences, and it's just a tear fest almost. And I can recall heading to one of those conferences, flying on the plane, in the exact moment I was sitting there, really almost trying to meditate on, how are we going to get out of this mess? How are we going to deal with the extinction crisis and all the environmental problems? And while I'm sitting on the plane, I come to the conclusion that technology is the only way through. It's so stupid too, because I'm on the plane. I feel like the bias is right there, driving me to that answer. And I think I was able to hold on to that for another 2 years or so. But, in that time, I met Herman Daly and Brian Check and others who are
That's where you went wrong, dude.
Yeah, I know.
That's where you
They're in
went
the
wrong.
ecological economics realm, and basically limits to growth, and there it goes. No more.
You could have gotten a job with the
techno-optimism.
woman that you met from whatever the airline was, talking about how she's using recyclable cups or something.
Oh yeah, you're going back to another story of mine where
That would have been a much better path for you.
Yeah, she was the sustainability chief at an airline, probably pulling in a pretty high six-figure salary, and their big moves were subbing out the kinds of materials that they use for coffee cups.
And I think they were throwing these little balls into their dryers as well. Yeah.
On the planes.
Yeah. Well, when they had, anyway, never mind.
Yeah, they were throwing them into the ocean from the plane, seeing if that would suck up some of the CO2. I don't know.
Ah, that's the new way. We got to put dryer balls in the ocean. That'll solve it.
Anyways, I brought this up, because I was actually thinking about this recently after reading this article that I would say it's a good thing that I've had a few days to process it, because I was pretty worked up when I read it at the time. And of course, I had to share it with you guys.
Thank you
because
so
that's
much.
who I am, okay?
Yeah, I've complained ad infinitum that you guys keep sharing the worst stuff in the world. Like, you want to get depressed, just have Jason and a share give you some articles to read.
Or listen to our podcast.
The article was published in The Independent, and the title is "The End of the World as We Know It. Theorist warns humanity is teetering between collapse and advancement," right? And it turns out that the theorist that they were talking about is someone that we've known for a very long time, Nafeez Ahmed. I don't know if either of you have ever interacted with Nafeez, but
Come on, he was a visitor in Crazy Town during the pandemic. You interviewed him.
I did, yeah. And I think Richard Heinberg, who we work with, was the one who got to know him first. Nafeez reached out to us, I think, when he was starting his own journey, and he was working on a film. And this was also years and years ago, after the dryer ball, but before, I think you joined us, Rob. And
I like how you can divide your life. It's like AD is after ADB after dryer ball.
Exactly. So anyways, Nafeez is, I've gotten to know Nafeez over the years, and a really wonderful guy, very bright, and I think very much concerned about the same issues that we've been concerned with, and doing all kinds of things. He actually had a column, I think, in The Guardian for a while, and has done a lot of work to, I think, spread awareness about some of the ecological crises we're facing, and also really looking at energy as a driver of that, including questions about energy return on investment and all. So someone I would say was very squarely in our camp. Something must have changed for Nafees a couple of years ago, and I don't know what it was, other than to say that he joined Rethink X. Are you guys familiar with Rethink X?
That's that guy Tony Saba's outfit. I don't understand how this happened. I mean,
yeah,
it's almost like he did the reverse of what we did.
Yeah, maybe it's interesting. So for folks who don't know, Tony Saba's this kind of a self identified serial entrepreneur tech dude, who's I think been successful. Author of seminal classics like Clean Disruption of Energy and Transportation, How Silicon Valley Will Make Oil, Nuclear, Natural Gas, Coal, Electric Utilities, and Conventional Cars obsolete by 2030.
Wow. Well, Let me see here. Look at my wristwatch. It's getting close.
It is. It's all happening just behind the scenes.
God.
So Rethink X has all been, a lot of it's very much about kind of this massive advancement. It reminds me a little bit of Jeremy Rifkin's stuff, like zero marginal cost society or whatever. Like we're going to have such technical advancements that, like energy is going to be effectively free. It's going to be so ubiquitous, right?
That's the best thing we can do for humanity, make energy free. Wouldn't it be great?
Nothing could go wrong there.
Nothing could go
wrong. All the
wrong.
other species on the planet would be thankful for us doing
Look at how wisely we've used the energy surplus that we've had. I mean, gosh, if that's any lesson.
It seems like, the fees, and he just, put out a paper recently and it's getting some media coverage. I think he's trying to sort of like square his the views that he's had as we gotten to know him with maybe the kind of the Rethink X views of things.
Okay.
And I'm going to read to you maybe the kind of the key quote in this independent article.
Taking a deep breath.
And they're quoting Nafees here, right?
Okay.
So here's a quote. An amazing new possibility space is emerging where humanity could provide itself super abundant energy, transport, food, and knowledge without hurting the earth. This could be the next giant leap in human evolution. But if we fail to genuinely evolve as humans by rewiring how we govern these emerging capabilities responsibly and for the benefit of all, they could be our undoing, unquote, he warned. And here's a quote continuing. Instead of evolving, we would regress, if not collapse. The rise in authoritarian and far-right governments around the world increases this grave risk of collapse. So it's like, apparently now the only barrier is authoritarianism.
Right.
And if we get rid of that barrier, then what we have is superabundance. If we could
hold on just a second, though. Who's going to be sitting together, like, in a row, right next to each other at Trump's inauguration?
Yeah, all the tech overlords.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm having a hard time squaring his concern about authoritarianism when they're like, we got our man in. It's no regulation. The tech's going to fly. What is going on? This is all very confusing.
It's clear from Dryer Ball guy that people can go down paths, and believe things that maybe aren't quite what we need to be working on. I have an example to follow up with someone else that I've held in really high regard. I got involved about a year and a half ago in a conflict between two environmentalists, Chris Smage and George Monbiot. Mm-hmm. Just to give you a little background, people probably don't need an introduction to George Monbiot. I mean, he's been one of the most prolific columnist writers in the environmental space for the last few decades.
Really respect his work. Yeah.
Writes a regular article in The Guardian, and you would say it was kind of on our side with limits to growth and change the economy and really really get behind conservation efforts and rewilding and all kinds of great stuff. And Chris Smage is he's right in line with you, Jason, in terms of thinking that small organic farms and re-ruralization is a pathway to a good society in the future.
Yes, he's probably a way better farmer and writer than I am. He has a great accent, and so
given. All these things are given.
I know.
So we've been publishing Chris's stuff since 2015 at Resilience, and basically what happened is George started becoming enamored of lab-grown meat as a way to stop having to have livestock out on the landscape. He sees that as a really bad thing, and so he wrote about this, and Chris kind of reacted saying, hey, wait a minute, not all livestock is bad. Livestock on a ecologically sound farm actually plays a really important role, and let's look into this lab-grown meat thing before we go too far. And basically they got in a big conflict over this. And the reason I was involved, it was decisions about whether to publish George's stuff or not. But essentially it was hard to see George going down this route of, we're our food, we can just Silicon Valley it, and it didn't seem like he really had the energy numbers sussed out either. So, again, that we often see with techno solutions is, maybe they sound good on paper, and maybe some early investors are willing to throw dollars at it, and you can do a pilot project, but you try to scale this stuff, and it's like, where are we getting the energy for this?
Well, Chris wrote an entire book about this. And the book basically just fairly, as respectfully as it could, but also pretty harshly critiqued the position of Monbiot, because Monbiot had a whole book. So Chris wrote a book in reaction to a book. Pretty rare, like a specific takedown book. And he says, I feel like I have to do this because, Monbiot is going down such a track that is so counter to what I think is going to actually work, that I need to let people be aware of how to think through these issues, because people are so urbanized that they don't understand how things work out on the farm, and I don't think Monbiot does either, even though he apparently visits farms and stuff. But and so this tech kind of mania seems to have taken over in many ways.
The reason I wanted to kind of hash this out is it's not so much about the tech piece of it. And it's not even, wanting to shit on people that we've known and respected or now we're pointing fingers at them. It's more actually out of, to me, a place of empathy, because having gotten to know Nafeez a bit, and I think also, George from a distance, but certainly having read so much of what he's put out, these are people that deeply care about the fate of humanity and I think other species on this planet. And it seems to me, not that I'm, I have a background in psychoanalysis or anything, but that it's just a sort of this understandable desperation. In my view, it's desperation of grasping something that provides an escape hatch from the consequences of the reality that they see, that we see, and they also see, right? So in, I think, George's case, and he kind of accused Chris of this a bit, which is if we can't figure out how to feed 8+ billion people, through effectively industrial processes, right? Then it's going to mean massive famine.
Yes.
And that's horrific. And he's right. It's horrific. Who wants to envision a future like that? It's understandable to want to avoid that at all costs, but then it can lead us to grasping at things that just won't work because we can't live with that.
Yeah, another area that George was following the same pattern is promoting nuclear power. He's kind of it's almost like bargaining with the devil in a way, but just trying to, find some way out of this mess. And it's a tough one. It's hard to understand. We're talking about relocalization and simplification. Try running a local nuclear power plant.
Well, let me give you my second bargaining that I had to go through. Okay, so I went through the one where I was bargaining with tech, and then I went to I was an early adopter of the Post-Carbon Institute had a relocalization network, and I moved to a small town, and I sort of was trying to push this movement where you would try to take your locale, and it's turned into the transition towns, but that experience also where I had direct relationships with political class, business class in this little town. I mean, these are the mayor lives down the street. You bump into people. So it's not like some distant DC policy situation where how are you ever going to even have any relationship with the so-called levers of power? But even at that level, that scale, it was just nothing really happened of significance aside from what families and people working together did on their own. That moving society at large was an impossibility in a sense. The system just could not handle this information, could not handle the implications. And so I think my bargaining phase also was I'm going to try to get enough people, enough political movement, and we're going to show that it can be done somewhere. When in reality, when push came to shove, everything just protected status quo, and all that we thought was important was essentially marginalized all the time. And there was token representation of our ideas at the level of any kind of institution. And so if you get to that point and you realize the implications of us not making this sort of great turning or whatever, all the, how many wonderful environmental books have been written that have these sort of grandiose ideas of turning society from this one path into a path of sustainability. And I'm sorry, but it's not profitable in the short term to do that. And in many ways, it's the fear of death prevents us from recognizing the peril we're in, right? So I kind of think that was another bargain I went to. And this is where it's we're probably not going to do anything of significance, right, at the big level.
I think it's a really good point because one of the things you brought up is these wonderful books, great ideas. I talked about ecological economics, Herman Daly. We've made almost zero progress, or even you could say negative progress in getting the policies in place that are needed to simplify, to relocalize.
I mean, you talk about watching the Al Gore movie, right? Here's the former vice president, probably should have been the president, right? And has a blockbuster movie, all the attention in the world, and all this ICLEI kind of movement was happening, and this was paralleling kind of what I was doing with the relocalization. I mean, complete sputter and die, as far as I can tell, right?
I think that I'm going to channel our friend Beth Salwin here, and I think we had talked to her for Crazy Town actually about positive feedback loops, amplifying feedback loops. And that was part of the season we did about drivers on Crazy Town. And one of the arguments she made was that in the early phases of exponential growth of things, whether those are the word positive in terms of positive, feedback loops is confusing to people, but whether those feedback loops are helpful or hurtful, in the early phases of them kind of growing exponentially, you might not see it. It may not look like anything, and then it reaches this sort of takeoff point. Talk about, Al Gore's film. There's that famous hockey stick graph, right? And I think a lot of, here I am, I'm going to be the positive one here, the optimistic one here. I know. I think a lot of these ideas that have been developed have been very marginal, right? They've not been implemented or had a moment in the sun temporarily and then got swamped by the status quo sort of reasserting itself. Those are seeds that are kind of hanging out in the ground waiting to, to germinate when the
After
conditions
the
are
fire
right.
burns through everything.
I mean, and crisis is, we've talked about this. Crisis creates opportunity.
Sorry.
And we talked about this when we were talking about Trump coming in, that there might be the upside of down in all of this stuff. So to me, it's not, maybe there's a form of bargaining that's happening here even to think that we have some measure of impact. I do believe we have agency, but to me, the thing that I wanted to point out and kind of tease out with you guys was you take people, and we've just used two people here as examples of well-intentioned, very smart people who I think, because of how dire things are and how unlikely maybe they are to improve through the status quo, let's say, have decided that our only option is to have some kind of technical, miracle. To happen. Yeah. And it's understandable. But in our view, it's dangerous and unhelpful. So if we recognize that people that we highly respect are susceptible to this, we talked about our own versions of kind of going through things where we're bargaining or going down rabbit holes of dryer balls or whatever. What's the warning there maybe for our listeners to consider? Because we're all going to be susceptible to this. Things are going to get worse, not better, right?
Well, what it brings to mind for me is kind of vaccinating yourself, if we're still allowed to do that, but not with an actual medicine, but making yourself a little less susceptible to cognitive biases. And we covered this back in 2021 in one of our episodes, so I'll put that in the show notes. But like an example of a cognitive bias is the bias of prior investment, meaning you've already invested in something, so even though it's not working, you keep hanging on to it. And I think that's part of what's happening in sort of the tech world ideas. What got us into, say, this climate mess? Well, it's the industrialization and the blowout of fossil fuels and the high tech and just giant paving of all of our landscapes, all these kinds of things that you would say are part of high energy modernity. And rather than say, okay, that investment got us some good things, it's not all bad, but look where it's taking us towards the potential of collapse, rather than sort of pulling back from that investment, going the other way, doubling down on it.
Well, the last COP meetings was in an oil kingdom, basically. So there's no withdrawal of those investments. They're going to fight tooth and nail to keep them and just have make-believe with their modeling. Yeah. So, but I say that's why I think the big institutional, I have no hope. But as individuals, how do you let go? I guess is what we try to say.
So testing our own biases is
think about what you're susceptible to, and it's hard, but spend some time looking at how you might be biased. And
well, I mean, I've got to get rid of my Cabbage Patch Kids collection that I have in an air conditioned storage, and I'm just going to have to cut that.
Is that the bias of prior investment?
Yeah. You
never know,
I spent
man.
so much on that.
You never know. When the global supply chains collapse, you're not going to be getting your toys from China anymore, maybe.
Maybe my Beanie Baby collection, too, will be worth something.
What's really sad to share is that Jason, his Cabbage Patch collection actually has cabbages on the heads rather than doll heads.
They're good storage cabbages. You can eat them.
They're buried in the farm, aren't they? Right?
Yeah. So we also, this throwback, we're just sort of sitting here like resting on our laurels in our previous episodes, right? So did you interview Megan Phelps Roper, Rob?
No, I don't think we've had her on the show.
Okay, we just referenced her work. Got it. We referenced her work, and she talked about the questions to think about if you're caught up in something, if you're caught up in a belief system that you hold very strongly.
She was part of the Westboro Baptist Church and left that very dangerous and horrific.
Yeah, and the Westboro Baptist Church was known for really gnarly, nasty public stunts to try to shame people who are gay, and
Right.
just they would go to funerals and disrupt them, and really
Yeah.
really mean spirited.
So she got out of that, and she seems very level-headed. And she had these questions. Let's just cover a few of them. She had like 6. So one of them that's really, I think, interesting.
These are questions you're supposed to ask yourself to test your own assumptions or beliefs or whatever.
Yes. Am I capable of entertaining real doubt about my beliefs, or am I operating from a place of certainty? Right. And I think that's true. We have to do that ourselves. Like I'm constantly testing. Like that's why we call it Crazy Town. Like, okay, am I the crazy one here, or is this nuts? What's going on? And so,
do you know how much I want the the eco-modernist techno solution to be the way that it works? I test this assumption quite a lot, and I haven't seen a way through given our energy material situation.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, another one of her questions that you should ask yourself is, can I actually articulate my opponent's position in a way that they would recognize and say, yes, that is reflective of my position? Or am I just creating like a straw person argument?
This one drives me crazy.
For their view.
Yes.
And I think that's a good one. And it's a one I try to actually remind myself when it comes to questioning the potential of technology. Because, for example, I can actually state some of the arguments that people believe the renewable energy transition is well underway and, kind of like unlocked.
Yes.
I don't agree with that.
And I think our whole season 5 of False Prophets, in which we reference these at the end of it, was about that. Was about us. We kind of made fun of the false prophets, but it was also
just
a way
that
we learned enough about them so that we could basically, not represent them as straw men. And I think that was important for us to do, as painful as that was.
And by the way, they were all men, so we could say straw men.
Yes.
Well, that leads to Megan Phelps Roper's a third question of hers, which is, am I attacking ideas or attacking the people who hold them? And now, in our false prophet season, we kind of fell a little and, had a foot in both sides there.
A and B.
So I feel a little bad about that. But I think in this today...
Do you really? Do you feel bad? Do you feel bad about shitting on Elon Musk?
No comment. I don't like to shit on people. But, today we've done a really good job. I don't think we've attacked George or Nafeez. I think we've talked about the ideas around embracing miraculous technology that probably is not going to be a way out for us. So, but that's we should have asked ourselves that question a little harder during the false prophet season. Sorry, Megan.
I think this is really important because, as we were saying, like, I have a lot of empathy for anybody in the position that they're in and the position that we've felt ourselves in, of going through the world and just being despondent and having grief. And I can't tell you how many times, I've been pretty low. And what's interesting, though, is as I kind of got to this point of acceptance, like, I'm also not as upset with people who are like George and Nafeez in this situation. I don't get as upset with them. Obviously, I can read their arguments and but personally, I don't get as upset with them. I'm much more gracious with people who, are in this eco-modernist space than I would have been before.
In a sense, caring for ourselves more, or processing our own grief and worry and anxiety or whatever. Allows us to actually have more empathy for people who, and I'm not saying they haven't processed, aren't processing or whatever, but who are dealing maybe in ways that I would define as bargaining with reality. And ultimately, I think this is what it comes down to, and maybe the biggest recommendation for folks and for ourselves, because I don't think there's a permanent state of being in acceptance. Right. I think there are better days and worse days for me. This reminds me of the airplane. I picked a bad week to stop sniffing glue. Sometimes it's harder than other times, but building our emotional resilience, our capacity to deal with grief and suffering and uncertainty and loss is really, really important, and keeps us, I think, away from grasping and reaching for these kinds of false solutions or false prophets. We produced, Post-Carbon Institute produced a whole deep dive on building emotional resilience last year, and it's full of lots of resources. We did some events and some interviews, and there's like a whole list of curated resources that we put together. So we'll drop a link to that deep dive in our show notes as well.
Yeah,
Great.
that was a really good experience for me. And I do want to highlight one of the things in there that maybe listeners could go out and do, and that's to get yourself at least 6 or 8 dryer balls and hug them before bed each night. You just hug them.
You're right. That was part of the deep dive.
And I have an idea. I think we can carve this out of maybe like a maple burr and then maybe cover it in sort of like, felted wool. I think we can turn this into a sustainable dryer ball product because that looks plastic, buddy. I'm sorry.
This is totally plastic.
You gotta do, Cher, let's do better. Let's do better.
It tastes great.
Okay.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Your friends at EnviroCon Incorporated are proud to announce our greatest and most sustainable product yet. That's right, the company that brought you energy-saving dryer balls is now partnering with Synthomeats to offer a new world-saving technology. Introducing Bako Dry Balls. Act fast to get your genuine set of Bako Dry Balls, our lab-grown, meat-flavored, edible dryer balls. That's right, we're doubling up. Why have just one earth-protecting technology when you can have 2? Simply throw our edible balls into your clothes dryer and watch all the ecosystems around you recover. And when the laundry cycle's done and you need some calories to get on with the task of folding your clothes, pop Bako Dry Balls into your mouth and enjoy the flavor of our patented synthetic bacon burst. Watch greenhouse gas emissions plummet as you snack on this miracle food. EnviroCon is not responsible for soap poisoning or any other effects of putting Bako Dry Balls in your mouth. The FDA does not classify Bako Dry Balls as food. Any resemblance to food is purely coincidental. Your effects on ecosystems and emissions may vary.
Crazy town, da, 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 crazy town.